results of recent studies of populations exposed to very low levels of radiation raise serious questions and suggests that risks may be higher than earlier predictions. Because of various methodologic questions involved in these studies, and because certain of the studies are still incomplete, the work group concluded that their results are not yet conclusive. Further epidemiologic and experimental work is needed to clarify the possible health effects of low-dose radiation. The long-range health effects of exposure to low-level ionizing radiation constitute a serious public health issue. The questions concerning low-level radiation require systematic research that is conducted in an open and credible manner to provide the most accurate information possible to both the public and the government.
The concern now being expressed by federal health officials like HEW Secretary Joseph Califano comes after more than 50 years of myths that the X-ray was safe, effective, and there would be no side effects. That belief is mirrored by the early use of X-rays to treat ringworms, to treat acne, to shrink enlarged organs, and to X-ray your feet in shoe stores. All that was before the discovery in the late 1930s that there could be a serious problem caused by low-level radiation from X-ray machines. Here in Alabama, no law requires persons taking X-ray pictures to be trained or licensed. Some of us may be overexposed due to untrained personnel and because of old and uninspected equipment. In fact, some people who are shooting X-rays now walked into the physician's office and within minutes of being hired were given the responsibility without knowing what the rays are or what the long-term effects of an overdose could be. For the next few minutes, we will examine the problem, its causes, and some possible solutions. Radiologist physician Dr. David Montiel.
An X-ray is essentially electromagnetic radiation, very similar to light. The difference between the X-ray and light is it penetrates things to a much better degree than does visible light, which you can see with your eye. We use the penetrating ability of X-ray to expose photographic plates so that we can get a picture of what's going on inside a patient. The great benefit of X-ray is that it allows us to see things inside the patient that we ordinarily might not be able to see by using physical diagnosis or other means of finding out what's going on with the patient. There is a minimal risk in using all X-ray, of course, and the risk is caused by the part of the X-ray that the patient absorbs, that part which is stopped by the patient and doesn't come out the other side to expose the X-ray plate. And that's essentially what an X-ray is.
It is known by health officials that some X-ray machine users here in Alabama buy used parts that may not be safe. Several cases of machines patched together from old equipment were discovered by inspectors. Situations like these are thought to be numerous in the state, but inspectors have to know about them to take action. There are 4,000 known registered X-ray machines in this state. This man is in charge of checking them for safety. He's state health official Aubrey Godwin. Godwin has 3 inspectors to cover the 67 counties in this state to check X-ray machines for leaks, to keep up with new equipment that is not registered with the state. 3 men for 4,000 machines. Some machines go for more than 7 years without inspection because of a manpower shortage.
In your opinion, as a person who is experienced in radiation technology, who is employed to protect the state citizen from this thing, is the Alabama citizen adequately protected from dangerous levels of radiation, medically and otherwise, because of funding situations in the state?
I personally do not feel comfortable with it. I think, you know, the people, I would think, would want more frequent inspections to ensure that they are the equipment in use and the techniques in use are the proper ones.
Do you think the people are adequately protected from dangerous levels of radiation?
I don't feel comfortable with it.
All right.
That's more of a political decision. I think, you know, the people would have to decide whether they feel comfortable.
Isn't that playing a game with the health and safety in terms of being exposed to radiation?
It's whatever the people want to fund.
Is it possible that there are some radiation units, X-ray machines that may not be properly connected or may not have the right person running them? And your people have not gotten around to
We
them?
know that there are units that have never been inspected in this state. We don't know of all the units, we don't believe.
I beg your pardon?
There are units in this state that we haven't inspected. We don't think we know where all the units are yet. We're still finding them.
You've got to be kidding.
No,
You're still finding them.
we're still finding units, yes, sir, that have never been inspected.
Did you find any of them that were leaking or not properly installed?
Yes, sir.
You did?
Yes, sir.
How long had they been allowed to operate before you found them?
In some cases, years.
Is it possible that there are people walking around who had been exposed to those units who got dangerous doses of radiation and don't know it?
There are people who got more radiation than they needed to get the diagnostic information, yes, sir.
You think they may have problems later on in life because of this?
That would be a statistical thing you'd have to develop, and it'd be very difficult to answer that.
In your opinion, does there exist a dangerous situation in the state in terms of adequate protection from overdose of radiation from units your people have not found and ones that are not adequately inspected?
It's hard to answer. You don't know what it is if you don't know it even exists. It's hard to say.
These are trained X-ray technologists. Danny Mellors and Terry Stiff received their training 4 years before coming to Baptist Medical Center and University Center. Both men belong to the State Society of Trained Technologists. Stiff and Meadows are worried that untrained people are being allowed to operate machines that have the potential to injure permanently.
Well, the biggest thing that we're faced with is the problem of determining exactly the amount of X-rays that it will take to get an adequate picture of a certain part of the body. And of course, the educational background of this individual, having sufficient training to understand first the origin of X-rays, how they're produced and how they react in the body. To understand this gives them a better understanding of how to adjust techniques for this part of the body. And also your manufacturers of different equipment furnish you with certain specifications and techniques, as you might call them, of certain parts of the body. And the biggest thing is to be able to adjust that when needed for different people, different size people, and for different parts of the body.
Okay, so an unqualified person, how do they know?
Well, it's very hard for them to know, just by trial and error, usually, that they may have to do the study several times in order to determine what needed to be done. And a person that has not had the training, it's just, there's really no way for them to know it except just by trial and error for them to learn this. And that's hard to do without several years going through this because of the lack of understanding of X-ray in general.
Right now, there's no licensure or any law in the state of Alabama that says who is qualified to operate X-ray equipment, and that's the main thing we would like to accomplish, is to only have qualified personnel operating the X-ray equipment in the state of Alabama.
Okay, at this point, who can be hired to take X-rays?
At this point, anyone can, because there's no law that says who can operate the X-ray equipment.
Well, in the state codes, I believe it's Section C of 205 of the state codes, deals with who is permitted to do X-rays. And the way it's interpreted to read is the individual institution, whether it be a doctor's office, a hospital, whatever, the person directing that department or that business, as such, the doctor's office, will be responsible for determining who can and who cannot do this. So it lies solely right now on that individual determining this, where there are a lot of states that are having licensure bills where there are qualifications, minimal qualifications set forth, and who can and who cannot take X-rays. We feel as a state society that this needs to be done And because we feel like it's not been done by the way the law is written now.
It wasn't until 1850 that the first states began attempting to exercise control over diagnostic X-ray machines. Alabama hasn't come very far with its efforts. 2 bills designed to require training for technicians have been killed in recent years. Both pieces of proposed legislation were halted by medical lobbies in the state. State Representative Joseph Carruthers is chairman of the House Health Committee here in Alabama. That committee is now looking at the problem of low-level radiation exposure.
It was brought to the attention of the Health Committee that we have several possible radiation hazards in this state. As your station has recently uncovered, the radiation in concrete blocks was certainly an extending factor. But another thing is in checking with the Department of Public Health, we find that there's a great number of X-ray machines in this state that has been several years since any of them have been inspected. Now, of course, you know, you have X-ray machines in doctors' offices, dentist offices, chiropractors' offices, as well as in your hospitals. And so they say that they just don't have the personnel and funds to get around to do these inspections. But we, as a committee on health in the House, think that it's time for some concern to be shown to this area and other areas of possible radiation that people come in contact with from day to day. It's definitely a correlation between the attention that the media has brought to this problem and the fact that the Health Committee was concerned enough to form this subcommittee to look into the problem and to find and make recommendations to the Health Committee and then eventually to the House as to what action we need to take in the House of Representatives and hopefully in the Senate to formulating laws or regulations that would control this and govern this aspect of our environment.
When did you first learn about the X-ray machines, a particular problem?
Well, of course, we have known for some 3 years now, the Health Committee has known that X-ray machines in some areas were not being inspected regularly. In fact, it seems I recall, and as being a member of the Health Committee for the last 4 years, that we discussed some 3 years ago that about the possibility of why X-ray machines were not inspected more regularly. This was the first time that this was brought to our attention some 3 years ago, and now we're starting off, and still nothing has been done in this area from the public health side of state government, and we're interested in finding out why it hadn't been done, what it's going to have to take to get this done, and to make sure that it is done.
Attorney Julian McPhillips of Montgomery says with the increased incidences of suits filed against firms for alleged exposure to low-level radiation, some new law could come about as the true effects of the repeated low doses of X-rays show up later in the forms of disease or conditions.
Well, 1-year statute of limitations applies when injury begins to accrue, but there's nothing really equivalent to radiation exposure, nothing at all. I mean, low-level radiation exposure anyway, because there's just nothing analogous in the law. And that's why we either need a change of decision by the Supreme Court or, in the alternative, some legislation by the Alabama legislature. Now, I would say that there might be a way, arguably, through another theory of law, you could avoid this. You could say that the injury actually did not occur until much later when it manifested itself. Or you could argue a fraud theory because the courts have held that whenever you can show fraud, then that tolls or stops the statute of limitations and allows you to have more time in which to proceed if you could convince the court that fraud was involved. But that may be difficult to do where, a company does not intentionally or fraudulently expose someone to radiation. They do so negligently. And in that case, the 1-year statute of limitations applies.
Are we in a situation where so little is known about the effects of low-level radiation that when a case like this is brought before a court, they have in mind an auto accident or a fall at someone's home or an industrial accident where the injury manifests itself immediately or maybe a couple of months later? Is that the problem?
It is very much a problem. So very little is known. Now, the other day in federal court, I had the opportunity to cross-examine the director of the Eastern Environmental Radiation Facility. And I asked him that very question. I said, isn't it true that very little is known about the low-level effects of radiation? He came back and said, oh, no, there's a lot known. Well, he just either was not being candid with me or was saying, yes, a lot is known compared to what little has been known before. But even at that point, still very, very little is known.
In our investigation into this problem, each person we talked to had a possible solution or alternative. Dr. Montiel, Aubrey Godwin, Danny Meadows, Terry Stiff, Representative Carruthers, and Attorney McPhillips.
There are areas of the body that lend themselves to other methods of diagnosis, though. The most common area is diagnostic ultrasound. Ultrasound is a means of getting images of a patient which do not use X-ray. They use sonar or sound waves which can produce an image much like the submarine sonar used in World War II. And in evaluation of the pregnant patient, we have found that ultrasound can get get more information than X-ray of the pregnant patient can, and we have switched to almost exclusive use of ultrasound in getting evaluations of expectant mothers. There are 1 or 2 areas where we still have to use X-ray, but in 95% of the time, when a diagnostic evaluation of a pregnancy or the mother or the fetus is done, we're using ultrasound, which is the best alternative method. Unfortunately, there are a large number of exams for which no alternative method is available. Yet.
Right now, there's no licensure or any law in the state of Alabama that says who is qualified to operate X-ray equipment. And that's the main thing we would like to accomplish, is to only have qualified personnel operating the X-ray equipment in the state of Alabama.
Okay. The way it's interpreted to read is the individual institution, whether it be a doctor's office, a hospital, whatever, the person directing that department or that business, as such, the doctor's office, will be responsible for determining who can and who cannot do this. So it lies solely right now on that individual determining this, where there are a lot of states that are having licensure bills where there are qualifications, minimal qualifications set forth, and who can and who cannot take X-rays.
We discussed some 3 years ago that about the possibility of why X-ray machines were not inspected more regularly. This was the first time that this was brought to our attention some 3 years ago, and now we're starting off, and still nothing has been done in this area from the public health side of state government, and we're interested in finding out why it hadn't been done, what it's going to have to take to get this done, and and to make sure that it is done.
I think public outrage is going to take that. I think the public is getting more and more organized after the 3 Mile Island incident, when a whole class group of people were exposed. People have become incensed, and I think here in Alabama, a lot of groups are becoming organized, and if they express that outrage strongly enough and make their legislators feel their feelings, then perhaps we can get some legislation.
That's more of a political decision. I think, the people would have to decide whether they feel comfortable.
Isn't that playing a game with the health and safety in terms of being exposed to radiation?
It's whatever the people want to fund.
At this point, thousands of Alabamians are being x-rayed daily by leaking machines operated by people with no training. The federal government is still in the dark as to what the safe exposure levels really are. The medical profession is trapped with a tool that is excellent and awful. Medical science knows of some alternatives. One is scanning, but scanning isn't as versatile as x-rays. The state health department in Alabama needs funds to hire more inspectors, and it needs a system to monitor new equipment when it comes into the state or when old machines change hands. The Alabama House of Representatives Health Committee is in the midst of its investigation, and its study is expected to result in new legislation within the next few months. Our investigation shows that most of us don't ask questions when we are about to be x-rayed. We don't know whether the person is qualified, and we don't even ask. There are reported cases of a mother taking her child to the doctor and the child having to be x-rayed. The mother or father is told to hold the child while the technician gets behind a lead shield, and both parent and child get a dose of radiation, adding to the danger levels now being defined by government experts. Now is the time to ask questions of medical personnel. If you're not satisfied with answers, call health authorities. Exposure to improper levels of low-dosage radiation is a problem that could affect us decades from now. Scientists say our children and our children's children may suffer genetic defects and other unknown effects of the rays. Many questions remain unanswered, but only action from the public and by the public will hasten those answers to the problems that now confront state health officials and all medical patients in the state of Alabama. This is Norman Lumpkin, WSFA TV News. Good night.
This has been a WSFA TV News special report. X-rays in Alabama, the true picture.